As always, when a new patch comes out, they do a big Ask Me Anything on Reddit. All season they've done this, and all season almost. I've been explaining they should do it a little bit later. Doing the AMA instantly after the patch doesn't give us time to absorb and get the really good questions in before it's all over. But hey, there we go. They did do another AMA. I want to sum that up for you guys. I do apologize that this video is coming as late as it is. I wanted to have this up like 2 or 3 days ago. However, those watching very closely, or maybe perhaps just even vaguely, will know that on Tuesday the 1st, that's tomorrow as you're seeing this video, I'm doing the post show for the official announcement of the expansion. And it's been a lot of work. There's been a lot going on, and unfortunately I sort of pushed this AMA back a little bit. However, I am here. I do want to talk to you all about it. And, well, it's kind of an interesting one because the game director, Mike O'Brien, left a big comment to start it off, as he often does, but this was such a big comment they actually just posted it directly to their official website as like real news in of itself. So that's what we'll open with, a message from the game director, as you can see here from the official Guild Wars 2 webpage. I'll read it out verbatim and then I'll talk a little bit about what I think it means. So he says, hi all. He says, the release of One Path Ends concludes a full year of live updates and a full season of Living World. And he's right, it was actually about a year and a couple of days for them to get these 6 episodes out, an average gap of 72 days between each patch. They say, as they wrap up the season, I want to take a moment to celebrate the journey we've been on together this year. He says, Guild Wars 2's content model is all about exciting events happening in the world. So from the beginning, we wanted our live updates to mirror that. But how? In Season 1, we went for the literal version, constantly shipping changes to the existing world. We did it at a breakneck pace, and we developed the tech and processes required to do so, which have benefited us ever since. But we regretted that frequency sometimes won over quality, that it sometimes felt like a race for players to keep up, and that constantly changing the existing world meant that old content couldn't be replayed. Since then, we restructured Living World to keep the aspects we love but without the downsides. I think that with Season 3 we've hit a really good balance. We're shipping meatier episodes with deeper stories and new open world zones to explore. The new zones are each a slice in time, so we get to put world-changing events in the open world without having to destroy old content to release new content in its place. And finally, we've used the 2 to 3 month release cadence to elevate the quality of everything we do. I think and hope that this year's releases have been the best work we've ever done. This year, we also took a different approach with PvP and World vs. World. In PvE, we make fresh new content with the goal of surprising and delighting you with our work. But in competitive modes, the community owns the game's modes and chooses what we work on. And we definitely shouldn't be surprising you with where we take those game modes. Instead, our goal this year was to develop more incrementally, test with the community on the live side, and take feedback every step of the way. At the start of the season, I said to the community that I wanted to delight you with what we'd ship, not with what we'd promise. It's a game after all, and I think the most memorable moments for a game should be moments of playing it, not moments of reading about it. There's also a deeper connection to how we develop. We've always been good at shipping things, but with our renewed focus on quality above everything else, we've had to get better at not shipping things. We now develop new content and features with a default assumption that they won't ship, and then, if they turn out great, we proactively decide to ship them then. Sometimes in the past, we've had to put a lot of effort into paying off old promises, which is important but can mean looking backwards instead of looking forwards. But I think we're finishing this year in a good position. We have a clear path forward, and we're building on a solid foundation, with a game that doesn't need reinvention, but mostly needs a steady stream of great content so we can focus on delivering great content. As game director, it's been my job to represent you, our players, making sure we put you in the center of every decision that we make, and making sure we reinvent ourselves when we need to for your benefit, or push ourselves further when we need to. When you think about it that way, it's really not much different from the job of a studio head, which, if you guys aren't following, is what he was doing before he became game director. He's actually juggling both at once. He says, I've loved acting as your game director, and I'm not going anywhere. But I know that eventually my other responsibilities will require more of my time, so I'm going to introduce you to someone else that I know will put players first. Mike Zardogeny, also known as Z, the lead designer of the second expansion. You'll see a lot of him in the lead up to the expansion release, and then he'll join the live side too, and I expect he'll eventually take these reins. Z has been working on Guild Wars for over a decade, and on Guild Wars 2 since the beginning, and he loves the game as much as anyone else in the world. He'll do you proud. And now, here we are at the start of a crazy week, shipping the season finale and leading into the announcement of the new expansion. You know our goal has been to do it with no breaks in content delivery. It's an ambitious goal we set ourselves at the start of this season, and return at the start of the expansion development. It requires us not only to essentially ship 2 products at the same time, but also to time them perfectly so that the story of one flows right into the setup of the next. Honestly, it's crazy, but we have great experienced teams working on both live content and the second expansion, and I think we're about to pull it off. So wish us luck, enjoy the season finale, and I'll see you again next week for the big unveiling. Woo, there's a lot to dig into here. So earlier on, I guess I find it quite interesting that they develop stuff with the assumption that it won't even ship. That seems so weird to me and must be quite horrible as a dev, like, to think and get attached to something, but always have to have in the back of your mind that it might not even become a thing. I also find it very funny, his comment here, it's a game after all, and I think the most memorable moment should be playing, not reading about it. Think about that, guys. You're not just reading about it instead of playing it, you're watching a guy on YouTube read it for you, and then what he has to say about it. I think that there's some joy in that, surely. But yeah, so the big awesome thing is this stuff about Mike Z. I, honest to God, thought that Mike Z was the top contender for becoming game director for a long time. I thought that Mo was only going to have it for a period of a couple of months, and so this doesn't really surprise me to hear that he might be stepping forward. So that's what he's been doing. He's actually working, he's the lead on the next expansion. So now as we roll into the next expansion, this is the man we're going to be hearing a lot from, and once the expansion comes out, that's what they mean by Mike Z becoming sort of taking over the reins, and then he'll, yeah, I think fit quite naturally into that. So that could be how we trade one Mike for another. It seems that maybe at ArenaNet, if you want to be game director these days, your best chance is to have Mike as your first name, and we will see how that goes. So pretty interesting post, and it's interesting to me because there's some finality to this as well. If you think about the start of season 3, it sort of was born into that turbulence of Colin leaving and people wondering what was going to be happening, and now the season closes with you know, the end of that story as well, and we find out probably, and this is not definite obviously, but probably who our next game director is. Interesting stuff. Okay, so let's go over to the AMA. That's already a huge amount of discussion we've had to get into before we can even start looking at what the devs talked about with this release. So this is mostly one path end stuff. They're not talking about expansion stuff so much here. That's probably all going to start tomorrow with the big stream and all of that stuff going on. But anyway, I wanted to give you guys the interesting responses. As always, I dug through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments and got the best of the best and the ones that a lot of people tend to miss. So here we go. The first question I've got from a player is, posed to the dev, is there any plans to do a core trait skill update at any time soon? The last few were nice, but there's still tons of repetitive, mechanically disappointing, or just plain subpar stuff in-game. For example, spirit weapons and hallowed ground. So we get a response from Carl McLean here. Carl is on the balance team. He says that the skills and balance team is pleased to say you'll be seeing a balance pass in the next release. We're looking forward to it. So Carl doesn't actually say if it's going to be a big pass or not, and I actually agree with the question poser here. I think that the game does need a sort of big pass. If you remember before Heart of Thorns came out and the first batch of elite specializations, we had the Lion's Arch update, which gave us specializations in general and rebalanced a lot of things. It made space for the elite specs. It looked at acrobatics, for example, and tuned it to be in a place where Daredevil could supplement it, and it basically brought the classes up to date in order to then have a new bunch of elite specs dropped in. I think that that's really important for the next expansion too, incredibly important. You've got stuff like the Tempest, which is best at damage at the moment, flat damage, best at condi damage, best at support, and pretty much any role. So how can the new elite specialization have a niche? Well, the answer is there needs to be a balance pass that makes space for that. Probably the best example, and this is not a bad thing, guys, the idea of them nerfing current elite specs to make space for new ones, it's not a cash grab, it's just good design. Probably the best example I can think of for this is the Reaper. The Reaper is supposed to be a power spec. Everything about its flavor oozes power, but it doesn't work for power. So if they are thinking of doing a new elite specialization that is doing something different, not power, because that's supposed to be the Reaper's area, they're asking for trouble because the Reaper is a condi spec right now. Traits like Bitter, Chill need to be nerfed. Power stuff for the Reaper needs to be brought up in order to make space for whatever they might be going for in the future, as long as it's anything but power. And that's happening across all the elite specializations. I really think there needs to be a big core change. Carl is cagey about that. We know we will get a balance pass, but how big it will be, they haven't given us any real suggestion. Wonder what you guys think about that. Moving on, we've got Sirish, who says, so why does the Siren of Ore tutor refer to Lissa as Is and Liss when we have multiple in-game sources that it is supposed to be Liss and Ilya instead, such as sectors, the points of interest, Mystic Forge weapons? And they also go on to say that this never got changed in the old Orient Scrolls either, and this is pretty large inconsistency that's just got even more inconsistent. Please fix, and then a little annoying emoticon face here. So those out of the loop, yes, when we have had the goddess Lissa referred to in various areas of the lore over Guild Wars 2, the specific names of the two entities that make up this goddess have not been set in stone, really, because there are conflicting sources. Sometimes they're called Is and Liss, sometimes they're Liss and Ilya. We don't quite know which ones are the true ones. So I have always loved this about Lissa's lore. Lissa is supposed to be inscrutable, Lissa is ephemeral, Lissa is evasive and manipulative and unknowable, and the fact that the little information we have about her is sort of conflicting with itself, I think it's great, and it adds to her story. And I've always thought that this was a deliberate thing from the devs, because that to me is strong, healthy world building. It is absolutely Lissa's MO to have this as a part of it. I've always really enjoyed this. Here we have a person on Reddit for who all of that stuff I just explained seems to have whooshed over their head, and they just want cold hard facts. And so they actually got a response from Lindsay Murdock, who says, I'm having a bug filled and sent to editing. Nice catch. Oh, this makes me so sad. This is so lame. It's not a bug. And even if maybe it started as a bug, embrace it. It was something cool. Her intangibility. So shout out to the guy below, Curio, who is a kindred spirit to me, and says, Elohim, Yahweh, Jehovah, Lord Jesus, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. Historically, gods go by dozens of names over time, and between even neighboring cultures, not all of which makes sense to the layman ear in the modern day. Personally, I think the inconsistency is fine, but Lindsay responds to this and says, thanks for the out, but I'm asking for this one to be corrected. Oh, sadness. I guess I'll have to move on and accept that whatever they go for in the end is Lissa's actual double name. Maybe I'm being picky, but hey, I'm a loser that cares a lot about the Guild Wars story, and I geek out about this stuff sometimes. Moving on, Slow Rules says, Hex, new elite specialization feature. So for people that don't know, and there will be no spoilers in this video for what it's worth to do with the story, as always, but some characters in this release actually use hexes. There are callbacks to Guild Wars 1. That was sort of a Guild Wars 1 mechanic. We get ArenaNet Matt P, who says that it was just intended as a fun callback to Guild Wars 1. Maybe we will see that for new elite specializations in the future, but they are a little cagey on that. Pink Unicorn of Death says, what was the process for episode 4 and 5 devs after they completed their episode? Did they get moved over to the expansion? Did they start working on episode 6, start Living World season 4? I've just been wondering this logistically for a while now. And so Izzy comes back and says, our goal is to have future Living World flow into expansion and then flow back into Living World. So we have two separate teams, and while they support each other at all times, they stay on Living World. So absolutely, I love comments like this, and it happens quite a lot in this AMO, guys. It's very clear there are people at ArenaNet right now working on Season 4 already. The gap from the end of Season 3 into expansion and then the start of Season 4 could be a lot shorter than we think, and that is thrilling to me. I wonder what maps they're going on. Next, we got Maximatum, who says that it was stated legendary weapons will be given through Living Season episodes. Does this mean that we will have to wait until Living World Season 4 starts for the next set of legendaries after this batch? And so, yeah, you guys might have been wondering this. When the expansion comes out, are we going to get a couple more legendaries with it? If they're kind of treating it like a release, does that mean we get like 1 or 2 immediately? But Mike says, no, this is right. Legendary weapons are going to go on hold now after episode 6. The expansion itself won't come with any actual weapons. It will be the Season 4 release right after that. Now, that might sound quite bad to you guys, especially if you're very entrenched in the perspective that it's going to be like a 9-month content drought. But if they do roll into it quite quickly, this might feel very natural. It would have been nice to have like maybe 1 legendary come with the X-Pack, but perhaps they'll do a trinket or something. Maybe a legendary amulet will come with it. More on that in a second from the AMA. Ghost Caesar says, is there anything more that we should be discovering for the Rift Stabilizer? So here we're talking about current events and some current events that went into the game and then just kind of seemed to stall. He says, we've seen comments by devs before stating that there is more to be shipped, but I'm wondering if there's anything we can still figure out now. And so Matt comes back, he says that the community has discovered everything there is so far to the Rift Stabilizer story. He says, I can't speak for how much of the story you actually know. So yeah, there is no need to keep hunting. I've done a couple of streams where we were like hunting around in Fractals of the Mist and stuff and trying to decipher why the number 70 kept appearing or something. But apparently that is not a thing. We also get another response as well. A current events dev was asked, what do they do? And they say a little bit of everything. We've been helping with upcoming projects, working on festivals, doing some polish for the existing current event, and moving cat-based technology forward. So, you know, the current events team were doing really well, and I really want them to put out more content quicker because their content's excellent, and I think really works if it can be pumped out a bit quicker. But they've not done so much recently, and I guess these are the answers. Cat-based technology. Woo for the cat lovers, I suppose. Next question has a great request, basically, for a dev. That often happens on these AMAs. People just make straight up requests instead of questions, but I like this. So someone says this: I do like the maps frozen in time concept, but I'm sure it can be confusing to new players outside online communities. So have you considered putting timestamps along with fun lore onto map loading screens, like Lake Doric, 1234 AE, the human capital city gets attacked by the White Mantle, an organization which, blah, 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 blah. This is a great idea. I completely understand the question, the request. I think it's excellent. We saw in the alphas of Guild Wars 2, they had loading screen lore only to remove it later. So the game director responds, and this is what he says to justify why they don't do this. He says, it's a suggestion that comes up, but so far, we're staying away from putting reading material on the loading screens because players aren't in control of how long those screens stay up, and the time varies a lot from system to system. Now, I value with what Mike's saying there, and there is a huge difference. If you're running an SSD, your loading screens are so much shorter than someone with a wonky connection on an old hard drive. You really, really do get a massive difference there. However, I would say you got to look at the product itself. It's an MMO where it's not a single player game like Uncharted where you're going to load into that level once, you're going to see that loading screen once, and if it happens to go short, you're going to miss it, and then that's gone forever. This is an MMO where I go into my home instance every day, and I may only catch a snippet of the lore one day, but gradually over the next 10 times I visit there, or I visit Lake Doric, or I do whatever, I'm going to continue catching those snippets, even on the shortest of loading times. There's no detriment to the game, really, to miss that lore either. If someone has a really short loading screen and they don't get to read the whole thing, there's still the opportunity, if they really care about it, to go to the wiki or whatever. Just the opportunity to totally miss off for this to be a detriment to the game, I think is so low. It is only an ad, and I think it's quite a strong ad too, and it's very smart to pair that with the whole maps frozen in time thing and at least put a date on there. So yeah, I get what Mike's saying. I don't think it's a particularly valid argument though. Moving on, we just got a great insider story here. The new Fractal, if you guys aren't aware, has a low gravity mechanic where you jump much higher. There's lots of new movement stuff going on. There's a new gem store lobby area, perhaps you can see it in the background on this video, where if you fall off the edge of a cliff, you sort of just get bounced back up and around. It's very interesting. So they were just basically asked about the low grav. And there was a funny hint on Reddit ages back as well, when the previous Fractal released that low gravity might be a thing. So here's a response. Me and Cam originally came up with this idea when brainstorming for the first boss of the Shattered Observatory. That's the new Fractal. We wanted to launch you from platform to platform, but Cam had the crazy idea to make you spiral around in a vortex, which wasn't possible with our tools. Design had been wanting more control over player movement for a while, so I felt like it was a good time investment to build the tech while working on the Shattered Observatory. So a bit of code, and a few months later, we have wind tech, which is basically just arbitrary forces. You'll see a lot of this in the Mistlock Sanctuary Lounge, and you may have noticed the Rivers and Super Adventure Box were updated to move you more smoothly instead of permanent knockback. So this is kind of some of the stuff that they were doing on the back end. This explains why there were those changes on Super Adventure Box, how that's influenced the new Fractal, and again, everything that I read these days, guys, just makes me think of the new expansion. Imagine what they could do with this tech in the new X-Pack with this kind of wind stuff. This could be very, very, very interesting. Somebody asked, hey, look, a new expansion's coming out. Are we going to get new animations? Response from Mo. He says, I love them too, but we don't have a team with a mission to make emotes. If it's an animator has spare time, that doesn't happen often because there's so much animation work to be done for new content. Once again, this is a disappointing thing to hear, and I am, many of you guys will know, a huge believer that when you do an expansion, you really should have the breathing room to add stuff like this and to look back at your general achievements like the Slayer achievement category and the Weapon Master achievement category and all those kinds of things, and you should empower those. You should add to those. You should build onto those sort of baseline features, and emotes are one of them. I really do believe that. I think that an expansion needs that breathing room when releasing. Seems like they don't have that, at least in the animation department. It was one of my disappointments with Heart of Thorns, and I guess it will be one of my disappointments with this upcoming product too. It does make me a bit sad, but I sort of get it. Particularly for animations, I get it. Somebody asked, hey, what about the Queens Jubilee? So if you guys remember, this was the cool event that we had in Divinity's Reach where you could go down, do the boss gauntlet, fight Liadri, do all of that fun stuff. It was basically a big farm festival. We get a response from a current events dev who says, this is something that we are thinking about, but we're not currently actively working on. I would be worried about facing Curio again, though. She's kept up her training in the off-season. That's a reference to the fact she's running around in Lion's Arch constantly. I like the idea of them doing that. It's a shame they're not actively working on it because it means that we certainly wouldn't get it this year. When is the Jubilee, actually? Has the Jubilee already passed? Maybe that was already a given that we were going to miss it this year. Moving on. We have a question. Again, I started this video talking about how, you know, when Season 3 started, we had the weirdness with who's going to be the game director and for how long, and it feels like now we've sort of got an answer to that. Another thing that, we're leaving Heart of Thorns, right? Another thing that was always a big question mark over Heart of Thorns as it released, some people really care about. I don't care about this that much, but there's a lot of discussion that comes up about it. And it's this weird thing of, okay, if Rytlock is the first Revenant, why is it that we can create new Revenants and, you know, we can play as a Rev alongside Rytlock while he was still a warrior? This doesn't make any sense, blah, 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 blah. Again, I think that this is just where story meets mechanics, and sometimes that line can be a bit weird and wobbly, and I can easily suspend my disbelief. But people spend massive amounts talking about it, and I did want to talk, it came up again on this AMA, and I wanted to refer back to it because it's kind of like, this was a problem, if you will, at the start of Heart of Thorns, and we've got a real answer to it here, sort of. Angel McCoy, she says, no one really knows what happened to Rytlock while he was in the mists, but he was the first known Revenant. He emerged from the mist with these new powers, and word of the profession spread quickly throughout Tyria. Note, you'll have to overlook a little disconnect because we introduced a new profession and it may not make good lore sense that suddenly there are all these players who are Revenants. This is one of those things where a gameplay element was introduced that doesn't have a solid lore background. That's just the reality of game design sometimes. I hope you like playing them. Feel free to make up your own role-playing background for how your character learned the skills. So there you go. It's not much of an answer, but what more of an answer were you looking for? Some kind of crazy time travel elaborate story? It was just a, you know, a weird incongruence from game design, and I think that it's pretty much par for the course. Anyway, so moving on. What was the most unexpected, weird, interesting source of a bug that you've ever encountered? I don't usually like these questions that much, but this was a fascinating response here from Muppet Hunter, who says that they found a bug, and the bug was only reproducible. We don't know what the bug did, probably like a crash or something, but the bug is only reproducible if you are in the air and you have burning on you while you pass through a tripwire. Wow, spaghetti code, that's crazy. What makes burning so special as a condition that this wouldn't trigger with the other ones? I have absolutely no idea. Moving on, a comment about future Fractals in terms of borrowing mechanics from the Raid team. Or from existing Fractals, rather, sorry. And they say this, that the Shatters Observatory is basically a sequel to Nightmare, so some of the mechanics and some of the feel is introduced in this one as well to feel consistent. Not all future Fractals will feel the same or be as difficult. So I've talked about this a little bit recently on some streams. It certainly seems like these most recent 3 Fractals, which feel very Raid-like, and not much like the other Fractals, they're longer, for example, and very boss-centric. These Fractals are kind of like a trilogy of Fractals that tell a certain story, and now that that's done, we might see a return to other kinds of Fractals like, I don't know, the Char attack on Ascalon Fractal and the Colossus Fractal and stuff like that. So it seems like the next new Fractal we see could be very different, have a different feel and experience to play through. That would be kind of fun. Something that hasn't sunk in for many people yet, Sea Sniffer says this, when's the next World vs. World update? And specifically asks, is there going to be any new World vs. World content in Expansion 2? Now, if you've been watching closely, you already know the answer to this question, but a lot of people haven't caught on. Mo steps in to answer here. He says, we shipped the big competitive feature pack last month because we think that competitive updates work better as live content. We're not holding on to PvP or World vs. World feature updates just for the expansion. We'll continue to ship them live. All right, and so if you read between the lines here, guys, what he's saying is, look, we just had a big World vs. World update that introduced the Legendary and stuff. We could have held on to that to do it with Expansion 2 and marketed Expansion 2 as, oh, look, it's got a big World vs. World thing. It would have been a totally arbitrary decision on their part just to make the next expansion look better. And then they could claim, hey, yeah, we've added a Legendary with the expansion and so on and so on. But they said they didn't do that. It was ready to go out and they put it out. They think it works better as live content. And yeah, what that means, guys, is the World vs. World team and ArenaNet, they're not an expansion team necessarily. They're just making stuff and they'll put it out when it's ready. Same on the PvP side of things as well. And as it would seem as well, probably the same for the Fractals group and the Raid group. They're not quite Living World. They're not quite expansion. They're just sort of putting their stuff out and doing it as and when they can. And I think that that's important for people to understand. I don't think, therefore, that if this expansion doesn't reveal any big world versus world stuff, I mean, it might in the end, but if it doesn't, I don't think that's a huge knock on it, because they've just, and we've always known that they've resolved to put it out as live content. Again, I'm really curious on the response in the comments to that various topic there. Moving on, when Legendary Armor was released, there was talk about Legendary Weapons allowing people to swap sigils like Legendary Armor, someone asks. This would be one of the most enormously important QOL features for these weapons, since we currently can't recover sigils from our legendaries. Is there any movement being made and bringing this functionality over to weapons? Thank you in advance. Lots of people asking this. There's a huge amount of discussion, get out of it, and my own opinions on it, but I'll just give you the answer the dev said and leave it there. Andrew M says, we have some things we're working on with regards to this, but it's not far enough along to discuss specifics. So what I think, reading behind the lines there, is build templates, maybe? I don't know, it's tricky and it's weird. They talked about the economical factors with the whole sigil swap thing and the necessity for it. They're working on something, but it's not far enough along. I don't know. It could be build templates. I'd be very excited if it was. Moving on, Dr. Peckers. Can we expect legendary trinkets as possible rewards for other parts of the game, such as World vs. Worlds, Fractals, SPVP, Raids, or will they always be tied specifically to Living Story seasons? So I think Dr. Peppers has a great question there, because if I was ArenaNet, I would be tempted to just put a new trinket on each season, because that gives them another 6 seasons, which, you know, is so far ahead into the future that, you know, they're basically sorted. Another 5 seasons of knowing they've got these big overarching rewards and fun things that they can do there. Maybe 4 seasons because we already have legendary backs, but still, it's a lot of stuff, right? And I would be kind of tempted to do that. The answer then was very cool. Andrew M says that we have an entire set of trinkets planned out already, and they won't all be tied to Living Story. So earlier in this video, I mentioned to you guys that X-Pack 2 could have a legendary amulet in it. I'm basing that speculation on what Andrew says here. Wouldn't that be kind of a cool idea that we get legendary amulet for doing all the metas and all the maps and all the stuff like crazy, similar to how we get the Aurora trinket, but for the expansion instead? That could be pretty curious. A legendary amulet would be a pretty nice selling point on an expansion too, don't you guys think? And last but not least for the AMA, there were lots of other small questions. If I've missed anything, which I don't think I have, please feel free to talk about it down below. Last question is something, again, I've got a lot of discussion on streams about recently, but it's about Season 1. Are you going to bring Living World Season 1 back? And so Mike O'Brien says this, that it's a question that comes up a lot. I have favourite moments I'd love to play again too, but we researched it a while back and realised that restoring and updating Season 1 content and putting it into an episode format isn't particularly easier than making new episodes, and we think the community is better served with new episodes. I understand where Mike's coming from with this, but I absolutely don't agree that all of this content is now old in the mind of the players and we'll all be bored silly playing it. You know, if the truth is they have to revamp a lot of it and repackage a lot of it to such an extent it's like putting new episodes out, then I think there'll be a lot of value people get inherent to that with Season 1. I'm a person who played every second of every patch of Season 1. And there's a huge amount of things that I don't remember about it and that I'm nostalgic about it and that I'd love to go back. And more importantly, I just think for the new players as well, and the increasing majority of us who never experienced any of it anyway, for all of these players, Season 1 is like this big barrier to enjoying the story. You finish the core game, you defeat Zaitan, and all of a sudden you're thrust into the middle of a plot with a bunch of characters who are all buddy-buddy, you have no idea who they are, and that's a dangerous thing when Guild Wars 2 bases so much of its success and revolves so many of its contemporary updates around story. You know, they're basing all these updates and all these things about story and connections with characters that you don't even get to meet properly in the game because it doesn't exist. Not to mention the fact that the game still tells people, hints at people that eventually Season 1 will come back. I think it's a big mistake not to have Season 1. I think this is a terrible idea to just leave it forever. And I think probably the best way they could go forwards is once X-Pack 2 comes out, we roll into Season 4 like normal, and there's frequent updates like normal, but they spend 6 to 9 months, however long it takes, to give us like a mini expansion of dumping all of Season 1 in as well, and then they get onto the next expansion after that. I think that's really important for the coherent, giving players a coherent experience through Guild Wars 2 and bringing the bar up. You know, Mike opened this entire AMA with that big post saying sometimes we have to look back to old promises. This is like the last little wriggle, the last thorn in their side after the major experiment that was Season 1. Once they got that done, It will be pretty cool. So yeah, I think that would be very valuable new content, but we'll see what you guys have to say. There you go, that's the AMA. It's huge, it's meaty. I know you guys will have missed it because they put these out way too quickly after the releases. Maybe they'll learn some lessons for Season 4. We shall see. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you tomorrow for the post-show. Please be there. It would suck if no one was there. Catch you guys next time.